Now, I'm sure everyone is wondering how much of this $18 billion was fraud. It's not the $1 million question, that's the $18 billion question. When I say a significant amount, I'm talking in the order of half or more, but we'll see.
Continues today from the federal crackdown and deadly ICE shooting in Minnesota. That includes a major shakeup in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Several top prosecutors resigned, including the point man on fraud, Joe Thompson.
Before we get into this, make sure you like this video, share it, and subscribe to Stateline so you don't miss what's coming next. Something extremely unusual just happened in Minnesota, and almost nobody is asking the most important questions. 6 high-ranking federal prosecutors didn't retire, didn't get reassigned, didn't quietly fade out. They resigned. All at once. These weren't junior attorneys. These were the people leading the largest fraud investigations in state history. And the timing of their exit raises a question nobody in power wants answered. Did this investigation get too close to people who were never supposed to be touched?
Continues today from the federal crackdown and deadly ICE shooting in Minnesota. That includes a major shakeup in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Several top prosecutors resigned, including the point man on fraud, Joe Thompson. He and 5 others, including the head of the office's criminal division, Harry Jacobs, all stepped down from their post. Jonah Kaplan has been following these developments today. Jonah, this is a big deal. What have you learned?
Frank, these longtime public servants have not said why they're stepping down, but we can confirm they were asked to investigate the shooting death of Renee Good. Now, you might not know their names, but you're likely to recognize the faces of some of these prosecutors, especially Joe Thompson. He's the man at the podium here speaking, as he has several times over the last few years, as the acting U.S. attorney and the first assistant U.S. attorney. Thompson was the point man on all things fraud, but he also led the federal investigations into the assassination of Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and the shooting at Annunciation Church, among many other high-profile cases. Doug Kelly, a former federal prosecutor, called this a very dark day for Minnesota.
There has been just a real tradition in Minnesota that the United States Attorney's Office maintains its independence and calls the shots based on what it believes is correct. And I think today this does tremendous harm to that tradition.
We've reached out to several of those prosecutors, and so far none of them have gotten back to us. The current U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Daniel Rosen, declined comment. Frank.
All right, thanks for the update, Jonah. Despite being under Thompson's microscope, Governor Tim Walz called this resignation a huge loss for our state. Walz wrote, "It's also the latest sign Trump is pushing nonpartisan career professionals out of the Justice Department." President Trump also took to social media today, claiming Minnesota Democrats are trying to distract from the ongoing fraud crisis. The president also claimed crime will come down after the ICE operation.
While several city and state leaders responding to the news as well, Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara has worked with Thompson on many cases. He said today, Joe Thompson is an institution within law enforcement, directly responsible for building and prosecuting the fraud cases now being cited to justify this moment. When you lose the leader responsible for making those cases, it signals that this isn't about prosecuting fraud. Governor Walz released a statement that read in part, Joe is a principled public servant who spent more than a decade achieving justice for Minnesotans. This is a huge loss for our state. But just last week, Walz said this.
You saw a U.S. attorney stand up, which was been released by, would have been let go by any other administration, speculating about things with no factual information. That's defamation. That's coming from the U.S. attorney.
A Walz spokesperson, though, told Fox 9 he was referring to the new U.S. attorney, Daniel Rosen, who just took office. Now, when asking the U.S. Department of Justice to respond to the resignations and specifically the alleged push to investigate Renee Good's wife and the refusal to investigate the ICE agent who shot her, a spokesperson sent this from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. There is currently no basis for a criminal civil rights investigation.
With the U.S. Attorney's Office down 6 attorneys now, it is unclear what's next. Senator Klobuchar did say there are other very talented attorneys that remain in the Minnesota office. In the newsroom, Karen Scullin, Fox News.
Tried to reach out to people that know him very well today, and everybody is tight-lipped. They say they don't want to speak for his motivations, and until they hear from him directly, they won't say. But everybody agrees this is a big loss for this investigation and for the state of Minnesota. It comes as new allegations from an attorney who represents Amy Bach. She is the has been called the ringleader of Feeding Our Future. That's the scam, the biggest COVID fraud scam here. He alleges that these Somalis that are sitting in prison, who made millions and are sitting in prison, didn't do this alone. They had help from state officials who knew about the fraud and essentially looked the other way. And he's pointing the finger at Governor Walz and AG Ellison. Take a look.
The Attorney General's office was invited by Feeding the Future to come to Feeding the Future and review documents, close to 100 boxes, of the operation of Feeding the Future. They declined.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, in a recent press conference, upped the ante on Minnesota lawmakers.
We follow the money, and we intend to follow it as much as we can, prosecute the individuals, no matter where they are, whether they are in the Minnesota government or they are sitting in East Africa. We will find.
Let's slow this down and look at what we actually know, because the official explanations do not match the severity of what just happened. Joe Thompson, the lead federal prosecutor on Minnesota's massive fraud cases, resigned. Not alone. 5 other senior prosecutors went with him, including the head of the criminal division. That alone is extraordinary. That does not happen in a healthy justice system. It doesn't happen during routine transitions. And it definitely doesn't happen in the middle of ongoing investigations involving billions of dollars. Thompson wasn't some background bureaucrat. He was the face of these prosecutions. The man at the podium. The one explaining how Minnesota was hit with what many have called the largest COVID fraud scandal in American history. $18 billion in question, with serious concerns that half or more may have been fraudulent. That's not political spin. That's the scale we're talking about. We're told these prosecutors were asked to investigate the shooting death of Renee Good, and shortly after that request, they walked away. No public explanations. No press conferences. No carefully worded statements. Just silence. Former federal prosecutors are openly saying this is a dark day for Minnesota. They're warning that the independence of the U.S. Attorney's Office may have been compromised. That's legal language for something much more serious: political interference. Governor Tim Walz publicly called Thompson's resignation a huge loss for the state. But here's where things start to get uncomfortable. At the same time, allegations are resurfacing that state officials were warned about the Feeding Our Future fraud years before arrests were made and did nothing. Amy Bach's own attorney is now pointing fingers directly at the governor's office and the attorney general, claiming they knew, were warned, and looked the other way. Let that sink in. The biggest COVID fraud case in the country. Warnings allegedly ignored. Billions gone. And now the prosecutors closest to the evidence are suddenly gone too. President Trump says Minnesota Democrats are trying to distract from a fraud crisis. State leaders say this is tragic. Law enforcement officials say losing the architect of these cases signals this may no longer be about prosecuting fraud at all. And that's the heart of this story. Prosecutors don't usually walk away when cases get serious. They lean in. Unless something changes. Unless pressure gets applied. Unless lines are crossed behind closed doors that the public never sees. Right now, nobody is talking. Everyone is tight-lipped. But one thing is clear: 6 coordinated resignations tied to the same investigations is not normal. Not in any state. Not under any administration. This story isn't over. In fact, it feels like it's just beginning.